And with that, I'd like to introduce a very interesting topic to us. And if you could join us on the podium. We have today some knock your socks off people who are involved in the world of high tech. And you know, Israel is known for the technology that comes out of Israel. And because of this conference today at the Israel conference, we'll be even further known as you talk to your colleagues about technology that came out of Israel that we thought is right here coming out of California. Things that we think Intel produces as a great California corporation, we're going to learn that, in fact, it's coming right out of Israel. And things that you just saw about Checkpoint, we'll learn a little bit more about Checkpoint, is coming straight out of Israel. And we have on our panel today one of the, actually not one of the largest Israeli VC who will learn how many billions of dollars are under management, which contribute to the overall $20 billion of dollars that are represented by our speakers today. From Patango, we have another VC that is a California VC that actively invests in early stage companies coming out of Israel, and when Checkpoint was early stage, he was there. Just to show you, if you keep your eye ahead of the curve, you can have a piece of the rock that's growing larger and larger, and that's represented with Bloomberg Capital. And then we have our own wonderful emerging growth company where ideas never end, where we have Zag and TrueCar represented on our panel as well to talk to us a little bit about how Israeli ingenuity has come into his company, and he collaborated and is a market maker and a visionary for how to buy cars. And we love that topic. Even though the United States now is the largest car producer in the world, we still like to know in California, I meant that our federal government. All right, it was a little jokey joke. All right, we in California love our cars, and with Zag and with TrueCar, we can buy them more efficiently and drive them about more adroitly. Our panel is moderated today by the wonderful Eran Wagner, who has helped so tremendously to compose today's conference and is part of the organizing team. And Eran is the president for North America operations for CVidya Networks. Thank you, Eran.
Use this one? Oh, I think this is working now. Thank you very much for coming here today. I must say that when Sharona first came to me and asked me if I'd be interested in helping her put together a small intimate event, I thought it would be pretty cool to sit across the table from some interesting and cool people. And this turned out to be a huge event. I really hope that it'll be a tradition and an annual event where a lot of people come together in LA. We've got a lot of those events up in the north, in the Bay Area. And I really do think that Sharona is doing a wonderful thing here, and I hope it'll become something of a regular event. We thought a little bit about the panel here and what we're going to talk about, high tech in a slow economy, and we've come up with a couple of questions that we thought would be interesting for you guys to hear the perspectives of the panelists. But before we do that, I wanted to maybe reach out to the people in the crowd. When you guys hear high tech in a slow economy, I'd like to hear a little bit about what comes to your mind. What are the things you'd like to hear about from the panelists? Do we have a lot of people from an investment background? We have a lot of investors here. No investors, nobody. All the entrepreneurs, you guys can go. There's no money here. How about lawyers, accountants, professionals? You're all Jewish doctors? Maybe you're all movie stars. So anybody with something you'd like to hear us talk about here? I heard, yes, please. How to fund technology? Absolutely. I think we've definitely identified that as an issue that people want to hear about. Yes?
What to do with
Nice one. Yes.
How to bring your technology.
Absolutely. You know, I came here today and I learned a very interesting fact. When I originally came to the States as a young entrepreneur, a lot of people came up to me and said, oh, you drink your own Kool-Aid. I learned that term at some point. And I didn't know what it means initially, and then I kind of figured it out. But today I really figured it out. Did you know that Israel recycles 75% of the water? Asaf from Kinnerot said that today, so now it makes a lot more sense to me. So let's start with some questions for the panelists, unless somebody else wanted to talk and I didn't see. So let's start with Eitan. Eitan represents the largest venture capital firm in Israel. And we all know that Israel has been very successful in exporting high tech. A lot of companies traded in NASDAQ. And in your opinion, are Israeli entrepreneurs different from their competitors internationally? Are there certain things that they do different that gives them a competitive edge? And how does it manifest itself in economic times like this?
So if you were here when Yossi Vardi was talking, so you know that because of their mother, that's the main reason. And I think the main, there's not much difference. I think the difference might, and especially in slow economy, is in Israeli stuff. You know, all the markets are abroad. You know, there's always for high-tech companies, there's no markets really in Israel. The markets are abroad. You know, the CEOs, everybody's traveling a lot. And I think the cost structure of Israeli startups was always different. Not only salaries, but also the way people work. You know, work 24/7, fly coach. You know, I see many of our CEOs, they fly coach, they don't fly business. So I think in slow economy, sometimes it can be a strength because you know, cutting salary, getting this phrase that is one of the Israeli commanders, when they go and get stuff, the staff gets going, you know, it's tough, so, you know, we have to, it's a very sort of community, okay, we'll fight for each other, and even if you know, we're cutting salary, so I think in that aspect, you can see some advantages for Israeli companies in such an economy.
Any one of our other panelists wants to add or counter that? Okay.
I find that immigrants in general have a higher propensity to become entrepreneurs. Israel, like America, is very much an immigrant nation. So in Silicon Valley, for example, 60-70% of the entrepreneurs are immigrants from Asia or Israel that are creating high-tech companies that are venture funded. So that's one aspect that perhaps is common to our two countries and not shared by a country like Japan, where there are almost no immigrants. I think Yossi talked about the culture in a very colorful way, but there is, and he sort of bypassed the issue of the army. But some of you don't have so much experience with Israel, so just a quick thing, and maybe Eitan can go into his experience there, but what we find as American investors is that the young teams that come out of the elite units that are picked for their brains, particularly in math and science, are put together in small teams, multidisciplinary, maybe one with a physics background, one with electronics, one with mathematics. They're put together, given a very difficult mission, given a budget, given responsibility, and then your grandmother's life depends on it. And so people get very motivated. They build something of value. And so when they get out of the army, they're serious. They want to go to university or business school or something, but they don't want to become lawyers, which is a great thing. They want to become entrepreneurs. No offense to our lawyer friends. So it is an incubator of a very unique type, and I think it's a fact. It'd be wonderful if Israel didn't have to have an army. They do, and one of the byproducts is a great cadre of young, motivated entrepreneurs ready to go.
Maybe I can take the question to a different direction. As Intel has a pretty large team in Israel, about 6,500 people in Intel Israel, and there are very strong cultural aspects that even though it's not a startup, I think it applies also to a lot of the startups. And if I look at some of the cultural characteristics, so one thing is the talent. It's very deep technical talent, which is fed in Israel for many reasons, but there's a pool there that allows us. The second one, which like any generalization is not always true, but is the type of out-of-the-box creativity that you can find in small Israeli companies, you can find even in a large company. And it is part of the culture. And if you just look at Israelis standing in line versus Americans standing in line, you understand that out of the box is something that has downside but has very strong upside. So this out of the box creativity always is very strong. And the third thing, which we rely on, is a great passion and a great engagement in what they do, which is very important when you have companies, small and large, and driving through passion is a very powerful way of getting the best out of people.
I would also add that I think it's also fairly unique because even in the U.S., you know, if you compare the Bay Area, Silicon Valley to, say, Boston, Boston has good universities, educated workforce, you know, very established. But if you look at where all the leading high-tech companies are, they're not in Boston anymore. They're all in Silicon Valley. And so even the cultural difference in Silicon Valley of, you know, not, you know, only half the people grew up in California, they moved to California, they did it for a reason, and you get people there who come out of universities who go and build new things that create giant companies these days.
So it's contagious, and it tends to kind of cluster. Scott, you started a business in LA versus Northern California, which is blamed for having more entrepreneurs by some of your other panelists. How do you bring a business to life? How do you market it? How do you get the funds required to get it up and running in Southern California, specifically in an economic environment like this?
Well, first of all, I'll just comment on the sort of the earlier question in the same context. I think that, you know, as a business builder, I've been building startup companies in Southern California for the last 20 years. And one of the things that you're always looking for is great partners, great employees, and great investors. And so there happens to be, I think, no sort of you know, claim to intelligence and drive and passion that's just simply Israeli. It just happens to be a higher correlation with the Israeli population. And I think that as a business builder here, I tend to really gravitate to this community just because, and I know a lot of you in the room, and it's nice to see a lot of familiar faces, because I'm working in this community, and it is a great way to get a head start and to build these companies more quickly and to get them done in a more effective way. I think that in Southern California in particular, though, it's very interesting. In the last 5 to 7 years, I've seen a real sort of quickening of the momentum around startups and the caliber of the teams and the caliber of the partnerships that are available here. Whereas Silicon Valley is traditionally very insular and really has sort of a head start just time-wise, there is, I think, starting to happen, something very interesting starting to happen in Southern California, where you have a lot of seasoned entrepreneurs, success stories, people who've gotten liquidity, who are now investing back into the startup game and into the early stage development of these companies. And right now, there are probably more interesting startups that are really big ideas that can really transform markets coming out of Southern California than I think out of Silicon Valley. Now, that doesn't mean that you know, the Twitters and some of these others that are getting sort of the lion's share of the, you know, the attention aren't obviously huge. But I think that if you look at the quality across the board and the number of startups that are coming out of California, Southern California in particular, and the quality of the entrepreneurs, it is phenomenal. It's a great time to be an entrepreneur. It's actually interesting. There's been a couple of sort of obvious cycles in terms of the economy going up and down. And I think it's always better to build a company in a down economy. You build it with much more discipline. I think that you tend to come out of those down cycles much stronger as a business and surge when the economy comes back.
Any comment, David? I saw you making a gesture there.
Oh, just a friendly Northern California, Southern California rivalry. But there's more than enough for everybody, and there's a third, partner here. We have Israel as our third coast. So, and that's something to say that as a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, and Eitan can see this because he goes back and forth. Israel is the closest proxy to Silicon Valley in terms of economic culture of anywhere in the world, and I'll include Southern California in that as well. Israel has really adopted and integrated so much of the kinds of ecosystem that is necessary and supportive and very helps to make flourish the vibrant tech companies. So it's a great tribute. Not very many other countries have been able. Many have tried. And it's partly the culture, it's partly the tax structure. A lot of things have had to work, and Israelis going back and forth. The people contacts, and those first people from Intel and Motorola who said, I don't care what you say about keeping me here in Silicon Valley, I'm going back to Israel with my family. And Intel and Motorola followed them and said, we'll put a team around you. And some of these things started to build up. It was a very positive cycle, virtuous cycle.
My only point was, and I think that's absolutely right, is that I think that dynamic is starting to happen in Southern California. Hopefully,
absolutely.
the interest just in this conference alone, I think, is sort of evidence of the fact that those dynamics that you see in Silicon Valley, in Israel, are now starting to take shape here, which is very exciting.
And an analogy about this issue about starting business in a downturn, how to get funding and so on, and it's a little bit like Israel's in a permanent downturn, and I don't mean it in any disrespect. It's in a downturn, or if you're from a small, remote country like Israel, the cream has to rise to get any attention. It's sink or swim. Medium quality companies do not cross the Atlantic and they don't become successful. And we VCs try not to fund medium success companies. We're really looking for the bigger ones. So in a downturn, by analogy, the really serious entrepreneurs continue. The people who are becoming entrepreneurs because it's trendy or they think it's a quick buck fade away. And so there's a flight to quality in a downturn, and Israelis permanently deal with that because of the distance issue. And so I think there's some analogy. You're used to it in Israel. You're used to having to fight harder, and it pays off.
Just to add to the point of is it a good time or bad time, I want to strongly support the point that for innovation, if you can maintain the operation, it's a very good time to prepare for the upside. Because when you have tough times, it's time for focus. It's time to maybe scale down some of the operations and the cost. But in terms of developing the opportunities, it is cyclical. There is going to be an upside, an upswing. In 2 months or 2 years, there's going to be an upswing. And the companies that are able to drive the innovation now with the focus that this period provides are going to be ready for this upswing when it comes. A lot of the need for the technologies, for the capability is continuing out there. There's China and Brazil and others that are joining. So the need continues to grow, and it's this period where the real strong entrepreneurs and the real strong innovation can really get ready for the upswing. So it is the time to invest now, when you can.
And additionally, you probably know this, but obviously rents are down. It's easier to find people. Bandwidth is down. Storage costs are down. CPU costs are down. Starting a company is almost following Moore's law. It's getting relatively cheaper to start, certainly in the internet realm. Companies,
the same direction. Rent prices.
they fluctuate. But in a downturn, to your point, Dafka, it's a better time to start because you, as an entrepreneur, you want to cut costs, and this is a very good time to do it.
So maybe Gadi, you represent a big brand company here, Intel. Intel decided and made a very brave decision some time ago to get into Israel for certain reasons. Could you share with us why at that time did Intel decide to build its first fab outside of North America, specifically in Israel, and how did that motivation change over the years?
I think if I try to point it to one place, it's trusted talent. And if you think about trusted talent, there was the information age, first industrial age, and then information. Today, if you look at a lot of where we are in high-tech, it's the age of talent. The thing that really drives the success of companies is the breadth and depth of the talent that they have. So unique talent, and in this case, it was Dov Fruman. It was one person with a couple of others that invented the EEPROM, a device that was very important at that time. And then when he wanted to go back to Israel and he wanted to leave Intel, Andy Grove, the CEO at that time, came with him, and Dov Fruman showed him that in Israel, in the Technion, there was a lab, and there were some people doing VLSI, and there was just a matter of trust in talent. And now that we have grown significantly, it's the same basic foundation. You have teams, and they're expected to provide continuously different, high-caliber type of talented people that are continuing to push the envelope. And the point about the trust, what Israeli companies are not good at in many cases is scale. They have great idea, there's a lot of initiative, but how do you translate it to something that scales into large companies? It's very difficult. So having the trust of the people so that this transition of technology, of capability can happen, the trust with the talent is a very powerful combination that still fuels the link to Intel Israel.
Thank you. Bob, we talked a little bit earlier about Checkpoint being antithesis for a little bit for what Gadi said, that we can't scale our Israeli companies. Checkpoint became quite a big company. It's got a very unique standing in the security world. What do you think in Israelis, or the people that make up the majority of the company, the founders, what do you think in them helped them scale the company differently than other people? And what do you think are some impediments maybe for further growth for not specifically Checkpoint, but from the Checkpoint experience to growing big Israeli companies?
So I guess I should first say that I've actually been working at Checkpoint for, I don't know, about 7 weeks now. So I'm probably not the most expert, but I have this, or I introduced myself at Checkpoint as being a new employee, but I have a long relationship with Checkpoint, going back from when I worked at Sun and Ypsilon and then Nokia. So I've been next to them or working with them for a long time. And so some of my observations is, it's the first time I've worked for an Israeli company, and one of the things I think, when you think about working with U.S. companies, is there's both in some sense things are culturally similar in that people tend to talk about facts and want to get things done, but there is a lot of differences as well, and it's important to understand these differences. I noticed this a lot a lot of things that were going on when I was at Nokia are now very clear now that I'm at Checkpoint, in that when you're talking to an Israeli company and you ask them something, they say no, that's not the end of the discussion, it's just the beginning of the negotiation. And most people don't get that, and then the same thing, there's a lot of frustration, I think, from the Israeli side dealing with Americans when it's hard to have good communication, and you need to build the trust and understand what each side is really saying and what you can do and not do. I sort of also want to follow up with actually a question from the previous session about what's going on with security, because I think it relates a lot to what Checkpoint is doing. So the interesting thing about security is there's a lot of known problems and known fixes, but they're not really used that much. You probably all read about, it seems like every week there's something about somebody loses a laptop or a database is captured with all the credit card numbers, and you get notices from your credit card company that they're sending you a new card. Well, a lot of that is like disk encryption. That's all there's lots of products from different vendors, but if you don't actually use them or install them, they don't do much good. But then again, the other problem, which is why I think security is continues to be a very important and dynamic area, and it's a place that it's one of the last places customers are going to cut back on because their business depends on it. But the hackers have not been. They're not having a bad economy. In fact, there's probably more of them because some people have lost their jobs, and they've just hacking is now a business. We used to worry about the people breaking the internet, maliciously, or just showing kids showing off to their friends. Well, we can take down Europe or something, but they won't do that anymore because that shuts off the revenue. They need the internet just like we need the internet. And so it's changed a lot. And so, there's a whole business out there about building tools and selling credit cards and selling attacks and taking over machines. And so it's, the hackers are moving probably faster and more dynamically than the people building products to defend them. So there's a lot to do. There's a lot of potential innovation that needs to happen, make security easier, make machines more secure. So there's lots to do. It's a big area of opportunity.
So just, a translation question, how do you translate, I disagree with you, in Israeli English to American English? There's another way to look at it. That's a direct translation, and that's at the heart of a lot of the matching that needs to happen.
So to follow up on the big Israeli company question, which I think keeps quite a lot of people thinking right now, because for the last 15 years, Israel hasn't been able to produce a real big company. A lot of people were talking about the next Israeli Nokia, and we talked a little bit about that. But Eitan, do you have a perspective on the fact that ever since the venture community really took root in Israel, they basically stopped the process of creating big Israeli companies?
Yeah, so I think it's one of the issues we are not good at enough. I think, in my mind, and I really respect Checkpoint. I think it's a great company, but I really think there is one really big company in Israel. That's Teva. Teva is the one that acquires company. Checkpoint is to be acquired, or maybe they'll be smart enough to really build it big. But if you look at the Israeli big company, there are some great successes. Teva, I think, is the only one that is really a company that is going to acquire, is very dominant in the space, is the biggest in its own space. And I think part of it is maturity on the industry. Some I think, and I think it will come. I think managers, Israelis that live abroad, they get educated here. They work in big companies. They come back. So I think, and we see it also in entrepreneurs. Some of our entrepreneurs that are second-time entrepreneurs, they think really big. They raise a lot of money. We have some of such entrepreneurs in our portfolio that I think they really dream big. They really raise a lot of money. Sometimes you say, "Oh, guys, you're running really fast," and yeah, that's the way they think. And I think there's a type of thinking that you need in order to build a big company. On another note, I think that in the last 10 years, even if you look at Silicon Valley, not too many big companies came about. I think there is an issue in general. Venture capital is a long-term cycle. I think in 99, 2000, very quick exit, very big exit with no revenue, made everyone think, in this respect, VCs as well as entrepreneurs to build companies and try to sell them even when they're not building a real big business. And that's part of, I think, why, it's hard to get companies public, especially now, nobody will take a company public with no revenue. So I think, and there was a very interesting article in the Business Week in February, I think, about how did Silicon Valley lost its magic? Why in the last 15 years there was no new Intel, no new Sun, no new Cisco? So there is something, I think, that, and my thinking is also it's a cycle again. I think it takes time for everybody to understand that you really, to build a big company, it has to be, to build substantial revenue, not to look for the quick exit. And I think it's to blame, us as well as, the whole ecosystem.
So it's not your fault, personally.
So I would challenge the assumption that the success metric is Israeli companies getting big. I think, again, the purpose of this conference is about exporting Israeli talent, investing more globally, and actually looking for ways to create value for Israel. I think that just saying, how many big companies have we created is not necessarily the metric. I also agree that it is cyclical. Innovation cycles really come around inflection points in innovation, and then those get commercialized over time. And so you have to look for when those occurred. I mean, during the Cisco and the Intel and the sort of Apple time frame, those kinds of companies were all booming around the semiconductor. And I think that there are other industries where you're going to see those kinds of inflection points. Clearly, today the shift away from internal combustion engines to electric, for example, is a great area for innovation. Those are the kinds of things where you're going to see new centers, new big companies getting created. But I just don't think that the metric is how big and how many big companies does Israel create.
And a couple things. We are complicit. The U.S. is complicit, and mainly Congress is complicit in part of the problem, and that is things like Sarbanes-Oxley, which are well-intentioned and very misconceived regulations that go to the problem of Wall Street right now with IPOs. And it's much harder to get the company public. And so the choice for VCs in terms of exit and entrepreneurs is really much more oriented toward trade sales and selling your very promising company to an acquirer. In the older days, when it was easier to take companies public, then they could give their own capital to the public markets and grow and sustain themselves independently. So part of the thing you can take back from this recommendation from me is write your Congress people and tell them that Sarbanes-Oxley needs to be either scrapped or reformed. Is one point, as one piece of it. And then
Interesting.
go ahead.
No, please, if you have.
I think part of it also is that there is a change dramatically from the hardware world, to from the material world, toward the software and toward the internet world. And in the hardware world, the cost of distribution is enormous. And a smaller company, a technology company, whether from Israel or America, has trouble becoming a dominant distributor because the cost of the feet on the street is really, really difficult, and it takes a longer time frame than we investors in VC invest in. And so the great companies that have been built up over decades, Intel, Sun, Cisco, and so on, Nokia, to pick some international, Hitachi, pick international ones, it's harder to do that now. The large companies we are seeing now are virtual companies, a Google, a Yahoo, Facebook, a MySpace. They don't have hardware products to speak of, Android aside. But most of this stuff is virtual, and the new internet distribution methodologies, I think, poke a hole and make an opportunity for some very large companies, those are 4 or 5 good ones, to start. And so Israelis should be thinking in that virtual world, because there are lower cost of sales and more ability perhaps to grow something really big.
Yeah,
Maybe we'll go.
I
Oh,
agree
sorry.
with that. Having worked for Nokia for a long time, I assume the analogy is because Nokia is headquartered in Finland, and Finland's a relatively small country. And it's really great when Nokia is doing well, but when Nokia gets sick or things go badly, and I think they're starting to have a lot of trouble now, it's pretty nasty there because it's so much of the economy of the country is tied to Nokia. So I don't think it's the best measure either.
So it's good to have both.
Yeah.
More diversity. That's very true. So let's go back to Intel.
And big, large companies tend not to change very easily. It's very hard. Smaller companies are more flexible. They're usually closer to their customers.
Okay, thanks. So let's go back to Intel for a second. Intel, apart from the fact that it benefited a lot from being in Israel, and I think, Gadi, if you want, you can mention some of the things. I think you were also instrumental in some of those projects that brought Israel a lot of glory in the eyes of Intel. Intel has also influenced the Israeli high-tech market in many different ways. From the time it arrived and generated a whole generation of new engineers up until today, where through Intel Capital, which you are also a part of, it invests in Israeli startup. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm more part of the engineering side of Intel. I manage a large engineering organization, and we're driving system on a chip. We're driving Intel into devices in other type of devices, not the PC, into embedded devices, consumer electronic devices, highly mobile devices, phones, and so on. But if I go back to Intel in Israel, yes, there were several ways in which Intel Israel impacted the rest of the Israel high-tech. One is that the fact that there was a big outside company, an American company, that was willing to spend and invest in Intel, I think gave a higher confidence for other companies to come in and do the same. This was kind of a proof point that it can be done, it can be successful, that others follow. The other thing is that out of Intel, even though a lot of people stayed at Intel, people who have left Intel started a lot of the other businesses. So there was a kind of a school of high-tech that was created that permeated to other companies. The other thing that we're doing till now, we do have an arm of Intel Capital, which is in Israel. And that is a very active investment arm. And there are, over the last several years, there was an investment of $200 million in 60 companies, so 60 local companies. Today, the Intel Capital in Israel portfolio has 18 portfolio companies. And the way Intel works with them, one is to help them in what I said, connect them to the larger scale, enable a great technology to understand how it fits and can scale to volume. The other thing is really matchmaking. And this is something that part of the activity that's here is part of a larger matchmaking. But matchmaking is a major factor in bringing portfolio companies to the decision maker, to the people who can consume that, who can invest in that, who can buy the product. So just as an example, Intel has technology days in which it takes the portfolio companies and it has meetings with the decision makers in IBM or Cisco or Citicorp or any of the other companies out there in creating businesses. And we have a success rate of about 25%, which is very high, of actual business coming out of those. So to the extent that people here can help create this matchmaking between the technology and the capability and between the potential markets and the potential larger users, that's a great value. So those are some of the ways in which we help and are participating in the entrepreneurial space.
Do you have any investments with Intel Capital, Eitan, or?
Yeah.
Yeah? Good. So I think we covered a lot about the background and what led to where we are today and what's going on with startups and how to fund them. From the eye of the investor, David, in this economic times, you could maybe kind of tee it up. What's hot? What's the next thing you're looking for, especially not only in this economic downturn from a sales perspective, but also from an IPO perspective? There's nothing going on. Even M&A is a little bit more difficult than in previous years. So what do you look for and how do you plan for exit when you invest?
So long scale, take a few hundred-year chunks at a time. You can say that the 19th century was about productivity and automation of mining, transportation, and agriculture. And the 20th century really about automation and productivity of the manufacturing world. And it seems to us that the 21st century is really about automation of this economy, the service economy. And here in Southern California, it's entertainment and engagement and experiences. And in Northern California, it's a lot of processing and analytics and optimization. So those are areas. Communication has been the great change in the last 10 years. I mean, the world is fundamentally a different place because of the new communications. You know, Intel has been a lot focused on the processing side. More recently, they're moving much more into communications, and that was a good timing for that. So the ability of the world to communicate and to create communities of interest, engagement at different levels, do comparisons, and so on, is fundamentally changing and opening up huge markets that never even existed. So I think there will be some great big companies created, whether they're here in Israel or most companies, by the way, today are multinational.
Last year, and decided to join a friend in building a company that focuses on operational efficiencies for telcos, where you can help them increase revenue by 0.5%, 1%, or 1.5% with doing very little. This thing was extremely unsexy 5, 6, 8 years ago. Nobody would have even looked at you. New devices, subscriber growth, all kinds of exciting things were going on, and people were not noticing all kinds of little things that can help tweak the operation to improve the bottom line. And during these economic times, sometimes the most unsexy things, the things you won't expect, become very, very profitable and make a lot of money. So I absolutely agree that it sometimes is not obvious. So I know we could talk like this for the rest of the evening, but Sharona is here, and she says that's it, and we have to take some questions for the audience, and she's going to be the first audience.
I have a question. Thank you. I'm very curious, since we have two VCs on the panel and two companies that also acquire other companies and a company that's growing, what is a company, an Israeli company, that, let's say, are two VCs and maybe Intel and Check Point that you've seen that, if you can describe it, that you think is really hot, that you've recently invested in or acquired? That you've recently invested in, a hot company that's in Israel or Israel-based that you'd like to tell us about, that is got some revolutionary technology, that's high-tech in our slow economy.
You have several to pick. We only did one recently. So the company is called Double Verify. It started in Israel when an Israeli ad network entrepreneur from New York moved back to Israel. And he was surfing the same sites. And he saw ads in Israel, sitting in his PC there, for Pontiac dealerships in New Jersey. He said, what a waste of an ad. They couldn't have ever served that to me sitting in Israel. I couldn't have even purchased that car. So he started thinking, how many ads are misdirected? So he's created a real-time verification engine that is now working on customers like Bank of America, Verizon. And this, he just started the company a year ago. Amazing traction, blue chip kinds of customers. We were oversubscribed in the round. So you can get funded if you have the right kind of proposition. He was very articulate, both in English and Hebrew. He knew his customers. He started out thinking he would go to the auditing agencies first. That didn't work. Then he said to go to the agencies who do the advertising. That worked. And even more working is the publishers and ad networks who want to charge higher prices with a third-party verification. So it's really proving a nice model. We co-invested with Comcast in first-round capital.
Chief, a follow-on question. Where is the R&D? Are the engineers and software technologists in Israel? And where is the sales and marketing taking place?
Yes, R&D, it was founded in Israel. And, the CTO is from Technion. Oren Netzer, the CEO, is this business fellow. And they're keeping all the engineering in Israel. Headquarters for sales, marketing, and all the advertising-related stuff will be New York.
Perfect combination.
Yeah.
Any other ones to mention? Eitan, you have an interesting company to highlight?
Well, we actually just started finishing 4 transactions. I'm just thinking which one is public knowledge. I think Winbar is one company that is an internet company we just recently closed. It's try to make it simple because apparently internet is a complicated business, but they actually, every time you go in and, for example, type camera, I want to buy a camera in Google, then you go to shopping.com, then you get eventually to Rich Camera, for example. Every time Google's just count the money. And if you go to Rich Camera, you go up, and you go to another place, they just count the money. So instead of that, this company enables actually those sites to go horizontally and actually go from site to site, and even if you leave them, they still make money. And there's a lot of money actually that apparently there is going always flow back to Google. That we're trying to see if this, it's a new platform that actually enables website to gain money from all these transactions, even if customer leaves the site.
Interesting. Anything else, Sharona? Anything else from the people?
Well, caller.
From Acuity Video Security Systems. And I have a simple question. When we're trying to start a company, you say you are a startup, you say, well, you've got experience, a track record of previous success, you've got a good team, you've got all these pieces that seem to be the necessary ingredients. The next question the guy asks is, well, give me 3 years of financials. And you go, well, wait a minute, no, we're a startup. Well, give me 5 years of financials. I mean, there seems to be a disconnect there. Can you help? How do we bridge that gap of having all the pieces but no past track record?
Constant fundraiser. I think probably the most important thing that you have to do right in raising money is talk to the right people. It sounds like you're not talking to, early enough stage investors. I mean, if they're asking for that, they're obviously going to be focused on all the wrong issues for you.
Isabel?
Yes, Isabel.
Thanks. Hi, Isabel Maxwell. One of the companies I did a little bit for advising for this year, not an Israeli company, an American, it's called National Security Grid. And they have a phrase which they call, this is a security technology-related question, it's called the critical million. And it's not about all the very big companies, Boeing and something, that have these national security offices and can afford to spend money on the security. It's about all the mom-and-pop shops and smaller ones that are building security for these companies. And those are the companies whose security is being incredibly exposed and very, very vulnerable. And this is, I think, one of the things that came up, I heard in really from Obama, from the administration thing, is looking for how to protect what they call the critical million, the kind of technology, the kind of actually knowledge of things that they should do that isn't necessarily requiring them to have a huge amount of money and spend, but some things that perhaps you could give advice, because everybody out here is building things. And they're building technology, and all of us are vulnerable to a certain degree, so perhaps they might have some opinions on that question. Thank you.
Probably best answered by Checkpoint. Sounds like all those guys should go to Zone Labs.
Security market, and it is I mean, there's a lot of, we have a lot of really good products, but I think there's still also a lot that we need to do to make it easier and to keep people from hurting themselves, because they're not, everyone's not going to become a security expert, but the people who are attacking are very sophisticated. And so having general guidelines, and we also do professional services as required. So I think it's a mix. I think the consumer and small enterprise products are getting much better, but I think there's obviously people are still getting broken into and attacked, so there's still a lot to do.
Just two things. I think security products are too complex and they're still too expensive. And there needs to be a massive shift downward to meet the customer demand with the technology, because we're invested in a company called Damballa. It has nothing to do with Israel. They track bot armies and zombie computers and so on. 40% of computers, maybe perhaps around the world, are infected at some time or another. That accurate? The problem is, if you tell the CIO, the CISO, Chief Information Security Officer at a company, that they have 40% of their computers or even 20% of their computers infected, that means that they have to fix each of them. They have to rebuild each one. That costs, what, $1,000, $1,000 per computer. It's such a huge cost that they don't even want to know sometimes about the problem. So it's just a fix that's too expensive right now. It's like not everybody can have brain surgery right now. We can't all afford it. So.
Yeah, I think that statistic also sort of, I mean, there's a lot of, say, Windows computers in China that don't have licenses. They don't get security fixes. There's a whole bunch of stuff. So it's probably not quite that bad, but it is a real problem.
Well, we're getting signals from the organizer. So thank you very much to our panelists for being here.
It's
And
always,
another round for
yeah.
Sharona.
No. Well, it's my pleasure to. The Israel conference would never be complete without a panel on high tech. And so we're always delighted. Thank you, Iran, for coordinating this great panel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Eitan Beck from Patango. Keep funding those deals. Thank you, Scott Painter. Thank you for helping us buy cars more easily. Thank you, David Blumberg, for telling us where we should invest our early dollars. We want to be on your roster.